Ultimately, what we're working with all these lines that are everywhere, is a support network. It literally is the subtle energies of the earth. But these are life force energies. They're there to support life on Earth. Feels like it's an amplification of the EMF that's occurring where it's crossing let's say a Hartmann line. So for instance, in the home where you have your Wi-Fi router, right? So it's sending out EMF, and in areas where that is crossing Hartmann lines, especially close to the Wi-Fi router, that can make someone feel drained. It can make them feel kind of discombobulated. It's almost like the EMF kind of scrambles the natural subtle energies that are moving through there.
Welcome back to the Power and Purpose podcast. I am Vanessa Soul, your host. Thank you so much for joining me here and investing your time and your energy into tuning into today's episode. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm super excited for today's guest. We have Lux Lingen. He is a consciousness researcher, dowser, and shamanic practitioner focused on the Earth's energetic grid and the practice of earth healing. For nearly 3 decades, he has studied energy lines, sacred sites, and the subtle systems that shape the spaces we live in. Lux, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here, Vanessa.
Amazing. So I love to ask all of my guests my signature question: who are you and who are you not?
It's a really interesting question. Yes. I would say that a long time ago, I dealt with kind of a fork in the road where I could continue going down a life that had a lot of mainstream success. You know, I had my career, that I had gone to graduate school and everything. And so I had that, and I realized that it was not making me happy. And it was one of those things where so many people in my life were turning to me and saying, you know, you've achieved all this. You've got it made. You know, you're really doing this. And deep down, though, I knew that this was not fulfilling, and I just could not imagine doing that for the next 20 years or 30 years or whatever. And so that's when I finally realized, you know what? I am getting out of this and I'm going back to my spiritual core, which I've been exploring since I was 12. And I'm going to go live in the woods and just be a weirdo. So that's who I am. I'm a weirdo.
Beautiful. And who are you not?
I'm definitely not that guy who um, cares about the mainstream expectations of society where, you know, you got to have this and that to be happy. It's like, no, no, no. Just find your center and just live.
Yes, yes, I love that. Thank you for that. So, yeah, I love to touch on who you were before who you are now in the present moment and this full expression in the now moment. And so what kind of led up to what were some big events? Was it your 12 years old journey or was it some other things as well? The short summary of that.
It really all started for me when I was 12 years old, right? When I went to the sacred sites of England and with my family excursion. And I went with a very interesting tour company. It was actually called Astral Travels. So that gives you a sense of their metaphysical leanings. And we went to Glastonbury, Avebury Circle, and Stonehenge. And it was just such a eye-opening experience for me at that age because they got the dowsing rods out and walking between some of the stones at Avebury and at Stonehenge, just those dowsing, like the dowsing is just so powerful there. In fact, if you ever find that you have any difficulties with the rods, just go to a sacred site like that and they're going to be pulled in your hands. The energies are so strong. And so that was a very powerful early experience for me that really set me on the path. After that, I got back to Canada and I became the weird kid going into the local bookstores and hanging out in the New Age section. Started going to a local metaphysical bookstore, started taking workshops at that time. And that quickly led me into Celtic shamanism at the time. And so there was really that link to the stone circles and all that. Because at that time, what really drove me was just what is this? What is Stonehenge? What is Avebury? What is Glastonbury? What energies were the builders tapping into? What was going on there? And what kind of ancient wisdom was tied into that? So that's what I wanted to explore. So that brought me to Celtic shamanism, brought me to things like druidry, and that was really defining my teenage years. Now, when I was 18 or 19, I went off to university and I got distracted by life, distracted by other things, and
Does
that
that
kind of
mean, does that mean partying? What does that mean? Does that
oh,
mean
it definitely, yeah, yeah.
getting caught up with the wrong crowd?
Absolutely, alcohol, women, all these things, right? They grab you when you get into that new environment, right? So yeah, and then that also really at that time I started working on my career and all that, and it's funny because those doubts about that new path were creeping into my mind, but it was actually a synchronicity that finally gave me the the internal validation and strength to leave it all behind. I was living in downtown Toronto and commuting by subway, and in the evenings I'd walk home, and there was a bookstore that was a like one block away from where I was living. And so what happened one day is that I was looking for a way out. I was looking for a way out from this corporate job. And and so I was thinking, this was back in the heyday when Kindle just came out and everyone was talking about how you could make a career writing Kindle books. And so I was thinking, maybe I should be a writer. And there was this one particular book, and it was kind of combining it was actually combining kind of fairy lore with a very kind of grounded um, horror fiction type thing. So it was very particular book, and it really had a big impact on me in the past. And I was thinking, you know what? I would love to write in a way that brings real lore, real ideas from spirituality, and just combine it into fiction. So I was thinking I'd really love that book because I had given it away a number of years earlier, and it wasn't exactly a common book that you could just find on Amazon or something. It was quite rare. And so I had that thought, and then about 5 days later, I'm walking home the from work, and I walked by the bookstore, and I wasn't even looking at the bookstore, but they always had this a number of discount books on a table in front of the store, kind of aligned and in a row. And at the very front of that row, I'm walking by and something catches the corner of my eye. And I look over, and right at the front of one of these rows of discount books is the very book that I had been thinking of 5 days earlier. And I just, it was a small thing, but I just took that as a sign. I think, synchronicities, they tend to be really big for the person, but when you describe them, it's like, oh, that's maybe not the biggest thing. But it was just so meaningful to me at that time that just it felt like something that I had to take seriously. And it felt like the universe saying, you know what, yes, get out of this life, go be a writer, go do something else. And so within a week, I gave my notice that I was leaving, and I never looked back. And that led me to, I never became the writer, but I started this new life of taking spirituality very seriously once again and diving in it fully. So yeah.
So would you say that the curiosity about the book writing writer, it was more about just sovereignty and creating a different type of freedom than what you were already experiencing?
I would say that, it let me, felt like this encouragement from the universe that you can do this and that there's this support underneath the wiring on the board, that there is this purpose that you can tap into. That's what it felt like. And so yes, taking back sovereignty and all that, it felt like purpose coming back into life.
So, Lux, how would you explain energy lines to someone who's never really heard about them yet?
Energy lines themselves, the landscape is absolutely full of them, and I'll get into kind of the various types and all that. But the one way to look at it is to see them almost like the meridian lines within acupuncture and within Eastern medicine. So if you look at an acupuncture chart, you have these lines of chi, lines of energy running all throughout the body. It's all mapped out. And so an acupuncturist, when they are doing their work, they are interacting with these lines of chi. The needles go in and they break up blockages, and they also encourage chi to move to certain places. But they are working with this map, pre-existing map of these lines, and that is very much what is occurring on the landscape. We are working with the Earth's meridians. And so it's very much a microcosm and macrocosm thing, right? Very fractal. The same patterns that we have occurring in the body are occurring within this larger body that is the earth. And very much like in the human body, in our vascular system, in our blood vessels, we have we have these arteries, major arteries, that take blood and bring it to general areas in the body. And these I like to call macro lines. They're the macro grid. And so these are very much kind of planetary wide. This has been mapped many different times in the past. One mapping of it that I particularly like is the Becker-Huygens grid, which basically merges Platonic solids and overlays them over the Earth. And what's really curious about this particular mapping is that these energy lines, these macro grid lines, they go right through so many different sacred sites. They go through Stonehenge, they go through the pyramids of Giza. So you have these big arterial lines that are out there. But then, just like in the body, where your arteries, they don't go to the tip of your pinky finger, right? So you have this capillary network that leads from the arteries and then goes to every point in your body. And I refer to these as the microgrid, or these micro lines. And they run absolutely everywhere, because just like in the body, you need to bring blood to pretty much everywhere, right? And so these microgrid lines, they are moving through the landscape in any local area that you're in. And so there's a number of key lines that are in that microgrid network that have been identified over the years. There's what are called Hartmann lines, and this is an energy grid that runs north-south and east-west, so it's this crisscrossing, and it alternates in polarity from negative to positive. So every other line will be positive, every other line will be negative, and they run only about 2.3 meters apart. So if you reach out if you're 6 feet tall or so, you reach out your arms, you're touching one grid to another. And so these, like, they're absolutely everywhere. And then you have Curry lines that crisscross at a diagonal to the Hartmann lines, and then you have things like Banker cubes, which are you basically it's not simply a 2D surface that these lines are running through. You also have the kind of a cube-like lattice that emerges and that actually stacks on top of each other. And you'll have one cube that goes up 10 feet, and then on top of that, you have another cube of energy. And these Becker cubes, they tend to alternate in polarity as well. So if you're living in a high-rise building, it might explain why some floors feel a little off and other floors feel very positive. But ultimately, what we're working with all these lines that are everywhere is a support network. It literally is the subtle energies of the earth. And I very much feel that these are life force energies. They're there to support life on earth. We, in many ways, are like cells within a larger organism. Just like in your body, every cell that you have is alive and can actually operate as its own organism. And so ultimately we are a collection of organisms that, many of them share our DNA, so our actual cells, and then many of them, like bacteria, they kind of live symbiotically with us, right? Gut biome and all that. And so you have all these cells living in you that are technically independent organisms but are living in symbiosis in a way that creates the human body. Well, just in the same way, goes back to basically the Gaia hypothesis, right? So all of us, whether it's the trees, the animals, the grasses, and definitely us humans, we exist as cells within a larger context, a larger body, and that is the earth. And so just like the energy meridians in the human body are supporting all these cell networks and all these cells, in the same way, these meridian lines on the earth are supporting life everywhere that it goes on the surface of the earth. So I think that's one way to understand it. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And because it is supporting the earth and life on earth and all the things connected to it, is there any significance in working with the energy lines? And if so, what are some of the ways that either you do it, or what are some common or practical ways to do it?
I find it quite important in a number of ways to work with the grid of the earth. One of the most interesting is that while these lines, like let's take the Hartmann lines for example, they run every 2.3 meters apart, and they can be very good for you. They can be very supportive. But if you, let's say, are sleeping right on top of one of these lines, that can cause a lot of issues in that you aren't going to get a good sleep. Let's say you sleep on top of one of the positive Hartmann lines. So temporary exposure to that energy can make you feel empowered and make you feel vibrant. But let's say you're trying to sleep on that line. You're not going to get a good sleep because it's trying to raise you up while you're trying to go down into rest. And this is actually what Hartmann, the physician who was working in Germany in the 1950s, he obviously, based on his name, he found these lines. And the way he did is that he was working in a hospital and he really started getting curious about why some hospital beds, people were recovering in them, and other hospital beds, it seemed like almost a death sentence to be put in that bed. As in, there was some difference that he wanted to figure out as to why outcomes were so different when these are, the same types of beds, but they're just a different placement. And so he actually got out the dowsing rods and he started finding the Hartmann grid. And he started to find that beds that were placed so that the patient was sleeping right on a Hartmann line were causing negative outcomes in that patient's life and recovery. Whereas if a bed was placed between two Hartmann lines, so in that kind of negative space in between, they were making better recoveries. And so this is something that that has been very much taken to heart within the dowsing community, of dowsing around your bed, seeing where the Hartmann lines are, and then organizing it so that your sleeping space is in between those lines. And there's a number of ways as well. You don't have to kind of stay within that 2.3 meters. You can also do things to move the lines or redirect them around the bed, that type of thing. So that's become a very important practice. But yes, working with the grid system is very important in terms of keeping human life working optimally. And this is really what I come to talk about with earth healing. With earth healing, it's not so much actually healing the earth. Like the earth is doing fine. It's doing, well, it's doing relatively fine. It's doing okay. What really, the beings that really suffer when these energetic lines are running into issues are those who are living on the land. And so when we heal the earth, when we heal these lines, yes, we're bringing it back to optimal conditions, but that really then directly benefits all life that's living on those lands. Sometimes you'll find that in an area where the grid network is being interfered with, you will find that trees kind of grow in weird, almost spiral patterns, or there's just, you can feel that this area has been thrown off. And so that's really kind of the importance of bringing things back into harmony. And really then the main things that we attempt to fix in an area are also tend to be caused by humanity. This is a really core idea, that if humans didn't exist, the energy system would be pretty much functioning well at all times. But it's really human involvement that throws things into, well, that makes them askew. And one way that happens is EMF fields. EMF interacts with these lines in ways that are not good.
Interesting.
And
Okay, so
so,
let's dive into that, and we don't have to spend too much time. But I was wanting to kind of like dive into some of this to get a little bit more example. So how does that's so interesting, because I kind of like feel like I already intuitively knew that, and then you called it out like a second before my brain thought of it. So how does that work? How are the ley lines uh, impacting or affected by EMFs?
it combines in a way that just causes everything in that area to just not be doing well, just to it's kind of an anti-life. So for
Is it
instance,
the
in the
EMFs
home,
that impact the ley lines, or is it the other way around, or is it both?
it it definitely feels like it's an amplification of the EMF that's occurring where it's crossing a, let's say, a Hartmann line. So for instance, in the home where you have your Wi-Fi router, right? So it's sending out EMF, and in areas where that is crossing Hartmann lines, especially close to the Wi-Fi router, that can make someone feel drained. It can make them feel kind of discombobulated. It's it's almost like the EMF kind of kind of scrambles the natural subtle energies that are moving through there. And so the EMF is the one really that's doing the damage, but it is messing with this natural subtle energy and making that subtle energy operate in strange ways. And so that can lead to just someone feeling off or tired or just can't think. So that's a very, very common one. And I would just add that the other human made thing that can cause a lot of issues is human emotions. So this is very much kind of the idea that the land has memory, right? So when we are in a very negative emotional state, we're kind of leaking this energetic gunk, if you will. We're leaking these emotional energies, and that absolutely can just congregate in an area and become an ongoing issue. And the way that we deal with that is that we cleanse and clear those energies. That's a big part of land healing, going into an area and pushing out all these accumulated negativity, nastiness, so that the land can function again. Because this negative energy, negative emotional fields, they are they're once again interacting with the lines. The subtle energy that's moving through the earth, it can amplify and support anything that's there. And so if an area has very positive memories, let's say a sacred site, right, where there's been worship for generations, the subtle energy there is amplifying what's there and making it very positive and very good. But if you have, let's say, a battlefield where many people lost their lives, Gettysburg is a perfect example of this nowadays. You that those subtle energies can be amplifying the suffering and the pain that happened there, and it can just help to perpetuate it because it's once again subtle energies. It's very much tied into consciousness, right? So our consciousness, it's located. It's currently focused and located in our skulls, but at the same time, there's all consciousness moving through the landscape. That's very much what chi energy or subtle energy has been tied into over the ages, right? That this is literally consciousness moving through the landscape. And so when that interacts with emotions that have crept into the landscape from humans, that consciousness can amplify what's there. Right. So that's some of the ways that the land can get particularly sick based on how humans are either currently interacting with it, such as EMF, or also where we have done a lot of nasty things and caused a lot of suffering, whether it's domestic abuse within a home or whether it's a battlefield or any kind of negative emotions like that. There is one natural form that can cause issues in the grid, and that is underground water flows. So where you have an aquifer running or an underground stream or anything like that, that is creating kind of it's creating an electromagnetic field around it, and that can interact with energy lines in unpredictable ways, sometimes positive, sometimes negative. And that's why when we douse these areas, we are always, if you were to map all the energy lines in an area, as I was mentioning with the Hartmann grid and the Curry grid, they're intersecting a lot. If you were to map it with, let's say, pencil, that your piece of paper would be covered in graphite after, you wouldn't be able to make heads or tails of it. And so what we do when we douse these areas is we focus on where are things going bad, right? So we ask our dowsing methodology, whether we're using pendulums or we're using rods, we ask, where are the issue areas? And then we can turn that around and we say, okay, where are the good places, right? Because
Mhm.
that's the thing to remember with all this is that for many years the dowsing community has focused on geopathic stress. That's really what this is all under the heading of, right? Geopathic stress. So places in the home that are causing negative health outcomes, let's say, or negative mental effects. But at the same time, and so for so many years, the dowsing community was so focused on that it started to feel like everything was negative. If you're interacting with the earth grid, it's going to be a negative outcome. Instead, when you actually go out there looking and say, okay, look, I'm not just going to focus on the negative. I'm going to look for the positive points as well. Because I mean, so many sacred sites, they are based on interaction with the earth grid, right? So obviously it can bring very positive things. And so when you go out and douse and you say, where are the power centers here? Where are the places where I should meditate? Where are the places where doing ceremony or doing spiritual activities would be enhanced by the system running underneath? Those are
Mm.
there too. So those are absolutely there, and so it's not all negative. There's a great possibility um, for making a connection with the earth that can be very positive by seeking out. And on a piece of land, you're going to tend to have both negative and positive points. And so one of the easiest things to do is just to, throw up your hands and say, all right, whether I'm going to heal this or not, for now, what I can do is I can avoid those negative sites. I can limit exposure to it. And at the same time, I can focus in on these positives and spend my time there, right? So it's very much multifaceted there.
Yeah, so fascinating. I love the detail here. I love the relationship with the earth in this practice, in this concept that we're talking about. I love the interaction because, humans, it's like we could be so focused on the material, you know, homes, buildings, cars, like just everything 3D, right? But this really allows us to connect and work with the earth and investigate, discover those amplified meditation spots, discover the spots with, I would call it density. I think you mentioned, you kind of alluded to it being called something else, but those spots that could be disruptive, or there's like some energetic distortion, because now we're more aware. And now we can really have a deeper relationship with the planet that we're on and the earth. So amazing. Any other thoughts on what I just said? And then also my next question is, is that what earth healing is, or is earth healing also a broader scope? And we just discussed like maybe a more specific scope of it.
Yeah, let's dive right into your next question. So, earth healing can expand into bigger concepts as well. And so, yeah, what we've been discussing here is really working with the microgrid system in your area in a way to optimize living there, right? To optimize the vitality of the land and thereby also you as you live on that land. Now, one way to do that is to focus on placement of your living spaces, almost like a feng shui, right? So focusing on placement of where you're putting your bed, where you're putting your living room, where you're putting the chairs in your living room. That's one way. And then you can get out there and you can also start moving these lines. So, for example, there's a technique called earth acupuncture where you drive a great big iron stake into the ground, and that brings the earth energy to kind of arc up and over an area so that is not necessarily going through it. You can also redirect lines by using copper. So these are very much kind of physical ways in. Now, there's also, and this is where my own background kind of comes in, because very much my background is core shamanism. So that's been with me for a long time. And there's many ways to heal the earth within core shamanism, very much reaching out to the consciousness of the landscape in order to bring about that healing, facilitating that healing. And what I found is that, and what I teach is a combination of two different ways in to earth healing. So you have this tradition of dowsing that came out of Europe in the 1950s. And that's very much about dowsing the area, locating where the energy lines are, and then taking physical steps to take care of that. And that's very good. It's very kind of left-brained, right? It's operating on that analytical level. The power of that I find is that it lets you diagnose a problem very directly. And I found that that was kind of missing within the shamanic tradition that I came in through. And so that's why I've kind of, and many others are actually doing this, but bringing these two halves together. So you have that kind of analytical way of working with the land, but at the same time, you have the shamanic way as well. That's kind of like the next step above. And what you're recognizing with that is a term called animism. And animism, it's this recognition that everything is alive. Everything has some kind of consciousness in it, whether it's a tree or a rock. There is an awareness. Now that awareness might be completely different from the awareness that you and I have, right? We have very different minds, and perhaps a rock has a much less developed awareness. But at the same time, there is that consciousness. There is, as it's defined in the philosophy of mind, there is something that it is like to be that being. So there is something that it is like to be that rock. There is that subjective experience. And so as we take into account animism, we see that everything in the landscape has some form of consciousness in it. And therefore we can connect with that. We can work with it. We can help to heal it. And this is where the shamanic practice enters into things, because through shamanic journeying or ceremony, you're able to enter a trance state or enter that kind of in between state of consciousness where you can reach out to these consciousnesses. You can interact with them. And then you can work with them and you can bring about that healing. And that's definitely kind of the next level in all this. And then you can get to an, it's kind of like pulling back in scale. And so then eventually, you're working with the microgrid, you're working through shamanic means. You can also then start working with the macro grid, this planetary grid, right? And that becomes very large scale earth healing. With working with that grid system, you can do things like try to manifest a bit more world peace, or manifesting harmony within the system. We have to realize that, yes, sometimes we feel very small as humans, but there's so few people doing this kind of work, and that we do have our own personal power. So as we do these kinds of things, we can create some kind of change even on a global level. It's just that sometimes it takes a lot of repetition. So,
Yes.
there's many levels to all this for sure.
Yeah, so fascinating. I have a question. So I understand. I've done some grid work. I've worked with the ley lines. Just my guides were kind of taking me through like this intro course one year, probably around 2020, and I was diving into so many things in the consciousness space just to taste it, right? Just to get a taste of what it's like to experience it. So I've definitely worked with ley lines and grids and things like that. But my question is, there's so many occasions where I see like a grid in the sky. What is that? Is that something else, or is that connected to the ley lines or the Hartmann lines or any other lines that we're discussing today?
So a grid in the sky, interesting.
Yeah,
How's that treat?
and I'm clairvoyant, a lot of the psychic senses. So I understand that I'm probably seeing what, the average person may not see, but it looks like grids, like lines crossing over. And I have to do this like this. I don't see this every day, 24/7. Yeah, I'm not looking at it 24/7. So I'm looking at the sky right now. I don't see it. But if I happen to be like in a very relaxed space or meditation space, like definitely when I'm tapping more into my intuition and my abilities are coming online, I will just see, and I'll see it over the whole sky. So I was just curious if there was any correlation, if those grids were kind of mirroring what's on the grids, I mean, the lines in the land, or if it's something different.
It's a very curious thing, because I've definitely given a simplified form of the grid network. The thing is that there are many grids. There are lattices upon lattices. And so many practitioners, you may find that you work with crystalline grids and that sort of thing. And there are so many different grids interacting because they're operating with different levels of consciousness, and they are operating in different domains of living experience, right? So you could have a grid that is predominantly affecting minds, and one that's affecting bodies. And you could have a grid that's operating just at a completely different level of being than what we're used to. So there are many, many grids. I'll definitely have to say that. And so absolutely, what you're seeing in the sky definitely could be something. Absolutely. And this is why in dowsing, we tend to have to be very particular about what we are seeking out. And so when we're looking for a Hartmann line, it's like you say to your dowsing rods or your pendulum, you say, I'm looking for Hartmann lines. And then that lets you dial into them, right? So that dialing in process is very important. If you just go out there and say, show me the lines,
Yeah.
without specifying what type, that can cause a very confusing dowsing
Yeah.
experience, because you never know what you're tapping into. And
Yeah.
so this is, yeah, and absolutely, there's so many different kinds. There's because then you start getting into things like telluric currents, which are basically the effect of geomagnetic, really large scale geomagnetic forces on magnetism in the earth. And so you have telluric currents that come up uh, in certain areas, like the piezoelectric effect. So quartz crystal itself, when it's under a lot of strain, it can actually give off electrical energy. So if you take a
Mm.
quartz crystal and you really squeeze it, and probably a human isn't going to be able to do this, but if you like put in a vise and really squeeze it, it actually starts creating an electrical charge. And so if you live in certain areas where there's a lot of quartz in the ground, then that piezoelectric effect can cause a lot of wild electromagnetic fields in that area, because anytime that you have an electrical current moving, you have electromagnetic fields that generate around that current, and
Yeah.
so that can cause a lot of different things as well. So yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
there's a lot going on in the landscape.
Yeah, so fascinating. So, if someone is interested or they're feeling pulled or called to really dive into this knowledge and to study it or to check it out or whatever, what are some quick, simple tips to do that?
Yes, well, you can definitely get some dowsing rods, or you can bring out your pendulum, and and really it's just about entering into that receptive state of mind, and trusting in the dowsing process. I find that the dowsing really is connecting with your intuitive mind. The subconscious, it knows so many things. There's a great statistic out there that the subconscious part of the mind, it's estimated that it's processing about 1 billion bits of information per second,
Mm-hmm.
whereas the conscious mind is it's working through about 40 to 50 bits. So there's a
Mm-hmm.
huge difference in what's happening in the subconscious versus the conscious mind. And so there's so much information that just tends to get filtered out by the time it becomes conscious. And but your subconscious mind is collecting all that. And I feel that a lot of
Yeah.
that is spiritual information as well, subtle energy information.
Yes.
And so with the dowsing process, you are allowing the subconscious mind to speak to you. It's still you definitely who is moving the pendulum. I think that's an important thing to recognize, because so many people get into
Yeah, people don't
dowsing.
get that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and they think, okay, this must be something pulling on the rods or something. When in fact, no, it's actually your subconscious mind that is causing you to unknowingly, right? It's the ideomotor effect. It's causing you to unknowingly, but still it's you moving the rods in a certain way because it's trying to communicate. And there's so many
Yeah.
different ways that that communication can happen. It can come through rods, it can come through pendulum, One of the ways that actually works best for me is it's some call it kinesiology or applied
Muscle
kinesiology.
testing. I was just going to say
Yep,
that.
there you
Yes,
go. Uh,
absolutely. That's a great
that
tool, by the way. If you can't get dowsing rods, maybe start off with muscle testing and then work your way into the pendulum or dowsing rods. Yeah.
Absolutely. That brought me back into this because I was able to use the rods very easily in my youth. And then for some reason when I got back into all this, the rods just they weren't moving the way they used to. And so I just found that like my particular way of doing this body dowsing is just taking my fingers and squeezing them together. And I can definitely feel that the change in the amount of pressure as it interacts with different fields and all that, or just even asking yes or no questions. You can feel when it's a yes, that the muscles are become more powerful, and when it's a no, it becomes less powerful. So, and one thing I'd like to tell people is that you got to find your own way into this, and that everyone has a different spiritual nervous system. So some people they'll really do well with the rods or with a pendulum. Others might be more attuned to applied kinesiology or muscle
Yes.
testing.
Yeah,
Everyone
absolutely.
has their own way in. And
Yeah.
at the same time, even trusting your intuition. Some people they can just feel when they cross over a line, that type of thing.
Yeah.
But
And
if you
repetition is important. Like if you feel like you're not strong, you will be if you just kind of like treat it like a game, like a playful game, nothing too serious. Don't be too hard on yourself. But I love all that. Those are great tips. How do people find you?
on my podcast, The Earth Healers. That's on Spotify, Apple, all that. And they can also find the Society for Earth Grid Healing at our website, earthgridhealing.com. And then also on Instagram and Facebook, I believe that is just Earth Grid Healing on Instagram. And on Facebook, you can find me at Lux Lingen. I believe it's
Amazing.
lux.lingen. But yeah, those are the main
Okay.
places.
Yay. And then, of course, all of his links are here in the show notes as well. So just look below in the description and you can click on it and directly connect with him. Lux, thank you so much for your time, your energy, and your wisdom. I really appreciate it. And it was such a great conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Vanessa. This has been great.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, everyone else, for tuning in. If you loved this episode, please share this episode with at least one person. And I'm sure you already thought of them because you're like, oh my gosh, like so and so was just talking about this. I got to send them this episode. So please do that. Share the episode. Thanks again, everyone. Namaste and have a great day.